how can we evaluate the responses that are being generated? And there are lots of different approaches, but in our setting, in our hypothetical setting, what we have done, or what we have decided to do is the following. First, we will implement tracing and logging. So every time a user inputs a query, we will be tracing the different runs of our agent using LangSmith, because we are building this LangGraph, and LangGraph has really good integrations with LangSmith, but you can use any tracing or logging tool like Arise or Elastic or like any other. There are different tools that can be used for tracing. But in our setting, we decided to go with LangSmith. And this is, again, an implementation detail, which we talked about the last time on how to think about choosing which library to go ahead with. And then once we have the tracing and logging set up, this will help us not only look at failure cases or look at cases where the agent is failing, but also to gather data sets for later on evaluations as well. In terms of creating the evaluation data sets, what is important is that we define the failure modes, and that can be done by sitting with domain experts, or that can be defined by looking at some of the test runs that we did with our agent in the first step. And also, it's important to not only look at just the end output or end results, because there are multiple components within our agent. There's this router, web research, retrieval, and then the overall synthesis. Any of these components can go wrong, and then your results may look very different. So it's not only important to look at the final outputs or the inputs and log those, but also to log and monitor the different components that we have. We want to look at the final answer. Does it include the correct citations or the resources that the user asked in the query? Were they retrieved correctly, or the documents, do they correctly reflect these resources in the final answer? There's kind of comprehensive testing framework that we have decided to go ahead with. But then there's a question that, okay, we are logging things, we are using LangSmith to trace these different test runs, but how do we actually measure whether the response that has been generated by the LLM is correct or not? And then we are going to talk about scaling the evaluation, but there are different approaches. So we can have humans that can evaluate the responses. So let's say if you're a team of small developers, you have initial prototype, you can just ask different members of your team to evaluate the responses, or you can use an LLM as a judge to evaluate the responses. In our setting, we have decided to use LLM as a judge because that will allow us to scale this further. And also, apart from scalability, it allows for the speed of development as well, because with LLM as a judge, we can quickly evaluate hundreds or thousands of responses. Some of them may or may not be accurate, but then we can subsample and look at maybe, let's say, out of those 100 responses, we can sample 10 runs at random and look at how many of those LLM got. And then apart from LLM, we are also just using simpler techniques like similarity matching. What LLM as a judge technique will be looking at is the final response, like how much does the output answers the question what user was asking. And then we can use techniques like similarity matching to match the response with the retrieved context to look for things like hallucination and stuff like that. And then we intend to do is not only on a couple of documents or a couple of runs, but we want to take a statistical approach where we want to provide multiple inputs multiple times and look at the distribution of our metrics. And our metrics can be different things, like whether the response is relevant or not, or whether the model is hallucinating, or there are any toxic results in the response or not. So we will look at the statistical distribution of all of these things.